Afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. As always, I am the warm and fuzzy and very emotionally available Paul Elam with a voice for men.com, and this is Going Mental. And I am with the ever uh, vivacious headmistress of misogyny, Dr. Tara Palmatier. You want to say hi to everybody, Doctor?
Hi, everyone.
I'm sure she loved that introduction.
Well, if that's going to be
Um,
my title, I'm going to need a riding crop.
Okay, yeah. Well, the way the honey badgers have been multiplying, you may have competition for that position before it's over with. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about some aspects of parental alienation, what happens in that situation. There's a lot of that people have pictures in their mind of what parental alienation is, and they imagine children that are divided from their parents. And that is often the case. Parents and children lose touch with each other. There's distance that forms and develops through the influence of the alienating parent, poisoning the child's mind against the other parent during the process of divorce, breakup, and the years that follow after that. Sometimes it happens well prior to a divorce, but we're not going to be talking so much about what goes on in the absence of these people from each other's lives as to what's happening while they're still connected. And often that is marked by, particularly with teens, beginning to emulate the abusive parent's behavior, demonizing the parent that's being vilified, and treating them as unnecessary, less than, and in other ways emulating the abusive treatment of the other parent. Did I get that all correct, Dr. T?
Yes, you did. Although it should be noted, adolescence is a time of, as one of my former psych professors described it, a time of transient personality disorder behaviors. Teens, even reasonably healthy, non-alienated teens can be quite bratty and asshatty. So it's important to realize that some of the behaviors may very well be modeled upon their alienating mother's behaviors, but sometimes it's just the natural growing pains of adolescence.
Yeah, I know that when I was 15, 16 years old, I think the most mortifying proposition on the planet was to be seen publicly with my parents. And so there is a normal part of separation and individuation that adolescents start moving toward, where they do need to explore life and find themselves outside that connection with their parent. And it's a healthy part of that for them to individuate. They don't have necessarily the tools to do that with great social finesse. They don't show that in that way often, but that is the ultimate deal, is to individuate and find their own lives, and then they eventually come back and form a more cohesive emotional bond with the parents after that's done. But that is not the case often in parental alienation. We see the distance lasting. But anyway, what, Dr. T, if you can start us, what are some of the things that characterize how this happens? Let's first talk about how we get a child from normal adolescent, my dad's stupid, which is normal, to taking on maybe an abusive mother's ideas about who the father is and what he represents.
Sure. Well, these behaviors don't just begin in adolescence; they take root much earlier. Um, they they become acceptable. I mean, they're not acceptable, but they become acceptable because it's been happening over time. And when you have a parent who's alienating, basically the alienating parent is giving the child the message, whether it's implicit or explicit, that it's okay to treat the target parent, most often the dad, with disrespect, contempt, disdain, to expect him I mean, oftentimes what I'll see are fathers who have gotten the short end of the stick on custody, meaning they've got every other weekend and Wednesday nights and maybe 2 weeks of vacation a year, which you can't parent on that time. Some people refer to that as renting your kids. And because the father is so eager, so desperate to have a positive relationship with his children, he will tolerate disrespectful behavior. He will tolerate being treated like a wallet. Because if he doesn't, the kids get angry and then say, well, I want to go back to mom's house.
Well,
So
let me interrupt for a moment and ask you something there, Dr. T. When he decides, and this is, I mean, I understand the pressure of a father not wanting to lose what little connection he may have left with his child, and that there's certainly going to be a lot of grief around that and difficulty in dealing with it with really firm boundaries. But in many cases, aren't we also talking about men who rationalize a way to accept this for a very unhealthy period of time with the mother?
absolutely, absolutely. I know of one gentleman, I did not work with him, but he was a frequent commenter on my website for a couple of years, who had a therapist who was actually encouraging him to be a Disneyland dad, saying don't give your son rules. You want him to have associate having fun and a good time with you, to the point where the therapist was actually instructing this father to tolerate abusive behaviors from his son and being treated like crap.
And first, I mean, and we got to say it, folks, if anybody's telling you that, they're full of it. They're absolutely full of it. What they're doing is setting you up to be disrespected by your child. And I don't mean to be treating you with ways that are disrespectful. I mean to actually not respect you anymore, to lose respect for you, which is going to happen if you have no limits with your child. That's just a fact of life. Gosh, I wish therapists would not tell fathers that their role is now in the child's life to be their garbage can and their ATM and everything else that the mother would just love to make them into.
Right. So, I think when you condone that behavior, it's very hard then to later on put boundaries in place and to demand to be treated with respect because it's been tolerated for so long. It's even more difficult if you are one of those dads who has the every other weekend and Wednesday night, because any damage you might be able to undo by having boundaries, by modeling better behavior for the kids, gets immediately undone because they're going right back to mom's for another 2 weeks of indoctrination, and where that behavior is not only acceptable, it's encouraged.
So and here's the deal, because these are like ultimately end up in some emotionally just torturous decisions that people are sometimes forced to make, and I'm sure that it's going to vary from individual to individual in some ways. But where do you get to a point, where is it healthy, do you think, that you say, okay, I'm not going to be treated like this, even if it means that I give up a connection with my child?
Sure.
Or that I allow that to happen?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's a question that each individual needs to decide for him or herself, because this happens to mothers too. Although it's much easier to alienate a child when you have them, 80% of the time, which most women do. I think you would see it more often with fathers alienating if there was a more equitable primary custody split, because neither sex is better than the other. It's just that women get more opportunity right now, and it's condoned and enabled to a large degree by the family court system.
The parent that has the power, and right now in our family court systems, it is women. that
But I
have
do
the power.
want to acknowledge, I do get emails from time to time to women whom this is happening to. But they're not the focus today. So I mean, this is hard. This is not an easy question. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. It depends on the individual. I mean, I think, don't be quick to make that decision, obviously. If you can get the kids into therapy, do that, because this is something that, depending on the severity of the alienation, you're probably not going to be able to undo this on your own through consistently modeling good behavior and enforcing boundaries. You need.
Well, if you're going to do that, though, let's be sure to go back and watch the show we did on choosing a therapist first.
Right. Right. And look, and that's another problem, right? Because mom doesn't want to lose control. The alienating mom doesn't want to lose control. So there will often be a court battle on selecting the therapist, because she's going to want to shop around and find a therapist who she can play puppet master with. And of course, if you find someone, a therapist, dad, who advertises himself as an expert in reunification therapy, which is what the therapy is called if you have been alienated, or even just if the therapist advertises him or herself as specializing in parental alienation, the alienating mom is not going to want that child to go there, because that represents a threat to her control and her campaign of hatred. So
And
that's
she has
often
the
an
power to make
obstacle.
that choice.
That's
She
right.
can
So it's
often be the one that pulls the strings and makes sure that her will is exerted in that situation. So again, we get back to many rocks and hard places
that's
for
right.
fathers in this situation.
So I think in the decision-making process, if you are in this unfortunate and heartbreaking position, you need to consider several variables. One, do you have the resources to fight this? I don't think anyone is served by bankrupting yourself, fighting a legal battle that you may not win, not because you're right, not because you don't have the evidence, but you need to assess your family court. Is this something that judges look the other way on? Are you going to be in front of a judge who actually cares about this? Because there are judges out there who will come down hard on the mother if you can prove that alienation is happening. So you need to assess, one, what are your resources? Two, do you have a family court system that will bring the hammer down on mom for doing this and court order that your kids get into therapy and actually penalize her through fines, through losing custody if she doesn't get the kids to therapy each week? Two, can you find a therapist who is qualified to treat this in your area? As we've discussed many times, there's a huge female bias in the mental health profession. The other thing is the cost of therapy. Can you afford that? Do you have insurance? This won't be cheap, and it might take a long time. If the court's not willing to back you up, the older the kid gets, unless the kid is acting out in some really disturbing ways, like drug abuse, pregnancy, delinquency, truancy, criminal activity like vandalizing, theft, you might not be able to get the kid into therapy just because he or she doesn't want to have a relationship with dad. So that's something to consider. I think also you need to consider, are you willing to sacrifice your self-respect to have a relationship with your kid at any cost? I mean, for most men who've been married to a woman, who has a personality disorder or traits, or who is abusive like this, who would do this to their kids, divorcing was difficult and scary enough, and you got away from her. Is it worth having a relationship at any cost with your child if he or she has just become a carbon copy of their mother and who is abusing you in similar ways? And what is your threshold?
What we define as a relationship. Certainly, I have an example in my life that always comes to mind. a very dear friend of mine that passed away about a year and a half ago, went through year after year after year trying very hard to connect with his alienated daughter. She had nothing to do with him. She treated him like dirt, just like his mother had. And no matter what, he would not give up. And I've heard a lot of men express that it doesn't matter what happens, I'm never giving up. I'm never going to turn my back on my child. I'm never going to walk away. And I understand that. And I understand that's a very strong parental connection that many men cannot put themselves in even in the idea of thinking of that they're going to break that connection. I just want to point out, though, that there may be a cost to that, because what I witnessed, and it was heartbreaking for me personally, was to watch this man grovel and beg for what amounted to the rest of his life. And he never, ever got a bit of love in return or recognition. And it was one of the most painful processes I've ever in my life been involved with. And I've been through a few things, but watching my friend go through this and trying desperately and calling me regularly and asking me, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? I feeling powerless and trying desperately to want to show his daughter, and me telling him that at times that, you know, the only thing you can do is walk away and hope that somebody decides at some point that they're going to come back, and that you can try to reconnect, and you can let her have that message. You can let her know and find other ways to let her know over time. But I told him that I did not think that it was going to work in his favor to continue to be a doormat that the ex-wife and now at that point his daughter could wipe their feet on and walk away laughing. And unfortunately, that's what happened until he died.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's horrible, and I think it happens far too often. You know, if you're a dad and you're experiencing this out there, you know, the disrespect, the talking back, the repeating mom's lies about you, you're a liar and a cheat, even if you're not a liar and a cheat, and especially if mom herself was the liar and the cheat, because oftentimes this type of mom will accuse dad of the things that she's actually done. There are things you can do. Now, a lot of therapists will tell you, under no circumstances, do not trash talk the mother. Do not, you know, tell the kids that she's lying or tell them your side of things. I think this is a mistake. While you don't want to trash their mom, when the kids are repeating lies about you, I think you must tell them that is not true. I did not do that. I did not have an affair. I am paying your child support. I'm happy to show you my bank, because that's a common lie these women will tell. Your dad is starving us. We're going to lose our house. He's not paying our child support, and these guys are paying their child support on time. So show the kids a copy of the checks.
There's a lot of dad didn't do this or that because he doesn't care about you.
That's right. And if you have concrete evidence, such as your monthly statements from the bank, if you're paying through the state, log in, show them. The kids say, now here's where you don't trash mom. If the kid says, well, why would mom lie about that? You don't say, because she's a psychopathic bitch. That would be wrong, albeit probably
even if
true.
she is.
Even if she is, even if it's true. You know, your kids need to come to that conclusion on their own. But you would answer, I don't know why your mom is lying about that. You know, sometimes when a relationship doesn't work out and someone's, you know, and the other person is mad at you, they say bad things about you, whether or not they're true. Now, that, in my opinion, is an acceptable response to the question, why would mom lie about it?
And I don't think there's any problem telling children or teenagers, or as long as they're of the age that they can cognitively even understand the words, to tell them that sometimes people get mad and stay mad a long time and they want to punish.
That's right.
And if you believe that's happening, and in many cases it is, I don't think there's anything wrong with telling them the truth about that. As a matter of fact, I think if you tell your children any less than the truth, that you're making a mistake. Put the
Right.
facts in front of them. Tell them you don't feel that way. Tell them what you've done. Tell them that what is being said is not true. And if you believe you have solid reasons for understanding why it's not true, you don't have to say because your mom's a psychopathic bitch, but you can say that you believe their mother is still angry because the marriage didn't work out and she's still wanting to punish, and this is her way of doing that. There's nothing wrong with telling your child that, and I would argue that there's something wrong with not telling them that.
That's right. And if you can tie it to an experience your child has had so that it's relatable. Look, like I said earlier, teens can be really ass-hatty and cruel to each other. And a lot of kids have had the experience of somebody in their circle of friends all of a sudden decides that they're going to ostracize them, and they stop talking to them and they make up lies about them. And if it hasn't happened directly to your kid, I would be willing to bet good money that they have a friend or a classmate who that has happened to. So you can say, look, sometimes when someone gets mad, they'll make up lies because they want to get everybody else mad at the person. Most kids, if it hasn't happened to them directly, they've seen it happen to other kids. That's something they can understand. I think also it's important to let the kids know that, look, because oftentimes when you tell the kids this, even if they're seeing the evidence with their own eyes, depending on how severe the alienation has been, it's going to create cognitive dissonance. And even if they see the evidence, they're going to be like, well, but mom wouldn't lie. You made this up. You're like, well, look, I can't make you believe me. What I'm showing you is real. Let's use the evidence of the bank statements showing that you pay your child support religiously. But what you need to understand is, again, depending on the severity of the alienation, if the kids start to get that what mom has been telling them about you is a lie, we're talking about changing their entire worldview. That maybe mom isn't the saint, martyr, victim that she's been portraying herself to be to the kids. And that can be really difficult and painful.
You know what else can be difficult and painful too, and I think this deserves to be brought up, in that how you rear children certainly has an impact on whether or not they're ultimately more or less vulnerable to being alienated in the first place. If you govern your family and your home by a set of rules that puts mother always first about everything, that everybody in the house is stepping on eggshells around mother because mother's never wrong, mother never makes mistakes. When she's mad, everybody in the family needs to run around and start fixing things. This is what you see in dysfunctional families where there is an abusive controller in charge. And whether it's male or female, you're going to see the same thing. The abusive controller will get angry, and then you'll see everybody else in the family unit scrambling to try to make things right so that the anger is brought under control, when it's really a lack of control by the abusing partner. And the partner of the abuser tends to be an enabler. And when you're enabling that stuff, when you're allowing it to happen and instructing the kids they better please their mom, when the divorce comes, you've set up the perfect storm that they're going to continue to do that. So I would suggest, again, you look back to the core also if you want to avoid this down the road at some point, and look to the nature of your relationship now. And are you living under a roof where there is an abusive matriarch in charge that's got everybody, an emotional terrorist that's got everybody afraid? Because there you're going to have an alienating mother at the end of that when it all comes tumbling down.
That's right. What a lot of dads fail to realize is that the alienation doesn't just start at the onset of divorce. It usually starts very early on in life. From the moment of birth. I think it happens whenever she undermines your parental authority in front of the kids while you're still together. When she abuses you in front of the kids, calling you stupid, or your dad doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, or he doesn't know what he's doing. You know, what that does is it teaches the kids that dad doesn't know what he's doing, dad's a loser, go to mom. And if you tolerate that kind of behavior from your wife in front of the kids, you're telling the kids that that's okay.
And they're sure telling them where the real power is in your family. And healthy kids, I think, I can't prove it, but I'll venture a guess to say that most really functional, well-adjusted children come from homes where power is shared.
Right.
In two-parent families anyway, where there is a sharing of power and where there's also a boundary around the relationship, where there's a loyalty in the parents to each other, that they stand and have each other's backs with the children, that you can't triangulate, you can't manipulate, you can't have a child get a no from dad but know that they can get a yes from mom and it will stick. Mm-hmm. Those are where I think your healthier children and more adjusted children come from. And if they're raised that way to begin with, if something does go south and you have a divorce, one, you're likely to have a partner you're less likely to have a partner who's going to alienate. And two, if there are attempts to alienate, you have a child that's been raised with a mind that can handle that and discern facts and make better choices about whether or not they're going to believe the propaganda.
Right. Well, I have cases where so twisted, where the kids recognize that the way their mom is treating their dads is abusive, and the kids will get in the middle and say, Mom, Dad didn't say that, Dad didn't do that, Mom, why are you so angry at Dad? He didn't do anything. And on the one hand, you could say, wow, that's great, the kid sees it. On the other hand, we're talking about a child protecting his father from his or her abusive mother. Kids should not be put in that position. And these are often the guys who believe that they're staying in the marriage, in this abusive relationship, because they are the ones protecting their kids. Like, you're not protecting your kids. You can't protect your kids from this in the marriage. You might be able to buffer them, but when you've got your kids intervening on your behalf, telling mom that she's being too hard on dad, pardon my language, but that's seriously fucked up. And that should be a wake-up call for you.
And if you do get yourself to the point, again, where you're in that situation, as so many men do, I mean, this is what, at Shrink for Men, this is often where Dr. T gets her first encounter with people looking for help, is when they're already in the process of being alienated. I know that happens when we get new forum members and do new people contacting ABFM all the time, is when the alienation process is nearly complete in many cases. And so it's just, the problem is, though, I think it goes back to boundaries, always, individual boundaries. If you accept an abusive partner, you're going to have an abusive ex-partner. I mean, there's a certain amount of the social physics of that, the human physics, that you're not going to be able to get away from. That whatever you invite into your life is going to be what you invite. It's going to come in. And so many of these guys tolerate and tolerate and tolerate. And again, like my friend I was talking about, it was a situation that was absolutely just gut-wrenching to watch, and to watch him get sick and die, and still struggling for something to take with him to the grave. And I just hate to see any men in that position. I'd see anybody in that position. I don't care what sex you are. That is a horrible, horrible way to go out, and it happens a lot.
I want to jump back to some practical things you can do if you're experiencing this with your kids. So one, as we already mentioned, tell the truth in language your kid can understand. Tie it to an experience that they will be familiar with, either personally or that they've seen a friend experience. Two, a common thing I see a lot of with the guys I work with is when they try to set a limit and enforce a boundary with their kids, the kids will be like, well, then I'm going to call mom, and I'm going back to mom's house. So they avoid the consequences of their behavior by calling their mom, going back to mom's house. And a lot of guys then will back down because they don't want to lose what little time they have with their kids. But unless, depending on what your court order says, I would say, no, you're not going back to your mother's house. This is my time. I have a court order. We're going to follow it. Go to your room or give up your phone or whatever the consequence is that you're delivering, and don't let them just go back to their mom's house. You're like, you don't give a child that kind of power.
Yeah, as a parent, you're supposed to be the one with that kind of authority, not the child. And that's why I keep harping on the idea of limits and boundaries, is that that's what so much of it falls back to. I think it's also really important to remind your kids that, hey, I care about you. I want a connection with you. Let them articulate that to them. When they're hearing that your father didn't pay child support or go to your softball game on Thursday night or do this or show up for that, it wasn't because he had to work. It was because he doesn't care about you. That's the kind of stuff that they're hearing.
Or not just that you had to work and couldn't go. What a lot of women will do is they'll send you a text or an email 3 minutes before the game starts. Now,
Yep.
This is something that should never happen, because what you need to do is be proactive. Don't rely on that crazy ex-bitch of yours to give you information about the kids that you can get from other sources, like their softball league or their baseball coach or their their teacher. Well, although a lot of kids will be instructed, don't tell your dad about this. We don't want him to show up. So as a parent, you have a right to contact the school and say, put me on the mailing list for the school calendar. Put me on the mailing list for the soccer games with the coach. Send me the calendar for the 4-H club or whatever it is they're involved with. And you manage your access to information about your child so that you're not making it easier for your ex to tell the kid, well, the reason your dad didn't show up is because he doesn't give a shit, unlike me, right? Because these women will play games. Like I said, they send you a text about the game 2 minutes before it arrives and you're 45 minutes away at work. You can get that information. You don't need to rely on her to do that.
Unless you have a restraining order that prohibits you from anything other than the prescribed X amount of hours per week on Wednesday night and every other weekend, then of course you have to comply with that. But you can tell your kids that that's not the arrangement you wanted.
That's right. And if mom is saying, well, you didn't come to the game because you care more about your new wife and her kids, show them the time date stamp on the text when mom notified you, or when their mom notified you about the game. But like I said, honestly, I've never heard of a restraining order prohibiting a dad from getting information from the school. There might be a restraining order prohibiting him from contacting mom, but you shouldn't be contacting the mom for that anyway.
Well, yeah, but there are divorce agreements that stipulate that here's the amount of time you can be with the child and no more. So if you start showing up anywhere else, you'll get reported for stalking and harassing, and then you will have a full-blown restraining order against you.
I thought you meant a restraining order prohibiting him from contacting the school. Yes, that's true. If you're prohibited from being in the same place as her, you can't go to those games, but you let the kid know that. That you would be there legally if you could. Another common thing I see happen a lot is dads act as if their custody orders are optional. They'll send the kids an email saying, are you going to come for visitation this weekend? And then they can't make any other plans if the answer is no. I mean, well, look, in some cases, I've had guys where they're like, no, you're coming whether you want to or not. I have a court order. And they'll actually have the cops come, and the kids get in the car, and they go. Sometimes, even if you call the cops, they won't enforce an order. They'll be like, we can do. And mom's standing there with a smirk on her face.
Or a tear in her eye. That's a real good one.
Yeah, but you don't give the kids an option. If it's your time, they're coming, whether they want to or not. Because you know what? Most of the time, after they get to your place or whatever activity you're taking them to, they'll be fine. So even if your kid's throwing a tantrum, I mean, if they're a younger child, you say it's going to be okay, we're going to have a good time, because a common technique of these women is they get the kids all wound up before it's time for you to pick them up, and then you, rather than see your kids crying and having a tantrum, will just leave them with the woman who instigated the whole thing. Don't do that. You're the grown-up. It is good for your child to be with you. Take them. And I'm going back to and this applies mostly to older kids, where you give them the option of opting out on their time with you. If you are going to do that, and there are a number of reasons. One, if you live in a court jurisdiction where the judge isn't going to uphold your time, oftentimes what will happen is father will send an email on Monday saying, hey, are you going to come? I'd like to make some plans, like going to a movie, going to dinner, whatever. And they don't hear from the kid until Friday afternoon. Are you going to come pick me up? Meanwhile, the guy's made other plans, and if he doesn't cancel everything at the last minute and rearrange his schedule, then he's a bad dad, and see, mom is right about you, and you don't care about me.
And she will use that. Immediately, she will seize on that very moment as proof of that everything horrible she's ever said about you is true.
That's right.
You can count on it. Alienating parents are experts at this kind of manipulation with children. I want to put up a comment, Dr. T,
okay,
that came in here, and read it. This is from, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that username, but says the best way to handle this is just to bite the damn bullet and say goodbye forever. If they are still kids, you have no way to influence anything. If they are grown, then you have a lifelong enemy. Face it, the child is yours due to your ex. It is, I'm not sure what he means by it, is a bad person, pure and simple. The child will likely outlive you for the rest of your life. There is a person who will do you damage any way they can. Get out, never see the child or children again. Try to salvage what is left from your life. It is easier to get over the loss than to spend the rest of your life defending against sworn mortal enemies. This sounds like somebody that is speaking from a little bit of experience to me. I hear a lot of anger. I don't know anything about this person's story, but and it may well be completely justified. That's a pretty hard line, Dr. T. But I tell you, I have in everything I read there, I have a real hard time raising any objections to it if that's the scenario we're talking about. What say you on that?
Well, I think, and sometimes, yes, that is a hard decision that you will have to make. If you have tried and the kids or adult kids won't go to therapy, are not respecting your boundaries, you very well may need to make that decision, because I don't believe it's healthy for anyone to subject themselves to that kind of ongoing abuse. But I also think it's important to assess if things really are that dire first.
And if it is that dire, I think it's probably really important to tell your children that your door is open when they are ready for a relationship and a connection that's healthy and that works and that doesn't abuse anybody. I think it's really important to do that.
And tell them why you're ending the relationship with them, and what you would need to see happen in order to try to repair the relationship.
Tough stuff.
Yeah. It's you know, this is really hard stuff, and I'm trying to find, I wrote an article a while ago where I developed a list of questions to ask yourself if you're contemplating this. I think it was called Divorcing Your Kids, but it's not coming up in my search. I will post it later once I track it down. I have over 200 50 articles, so my index is it's not easily jumping out at me. But you know, this just sucks all the way around. But I do think if it is that extreme, if it is that toxic, you do need to consider doing that. I don't believe that sharing genetic material should give someone carte blanche to treat you like shit. In fact, it means that they should take extra care with you because they are family, and that applies to your kids.
And of course, I think that we could avoid a lot of this by severing Title 4D money from family courts, by reforming the family court structure and system, by starting to look at restructuring and helping families recover from divorce instead of figuring out ways for lawyers to make money tearing them down and ripping them to shreds. All those things might have an impact. What do you think, Dr. T?
It just might. So might default shared parenting, so that a mother or father who is inclined to do this isn't going to have total access to the kids in order to do so. It would be much harder, I think, for an alienator to successfully destroy relationships, parental-child relationships between the target parent and the children, if the parents had more equal time, right? Because the kids need time to see, okay, you're not the moth cheek. You know, why am I so afraid? Why am I so angry at you? We're having fun. You're kind. You're gentle. You're not yelling at me. You're reliable. But if the kids are only seeing you for such a short amount of time, and then they got to go right back to mom, it's like a drug addict coming out of a rehab facility and then going right back into the drug den with his drug-using buddies. They're not going to, you know, the sobriety isn't going to last for long. I do want to finish what I was saying about the trick that kids don't respond to the last minute, saying, okay, yeah, we decided we're going to come see you, and you already have plans. Don't drop everything. Do not drop everything. Do not cancel your plans and pick up your kids. Instead, tell your kids, look, I would love to see you, but I asked you on Monday or Sunday evening last week, and you didn't reply until today. I wouldn't do that to you. I extended you the courtesy of giving you ample time, advance notice to tell me if you were going to be available, and the least you can do is do the same for me. And you know, they're going to be like, you don't love us. If you were a dad and you loved us, you'd drop everything. Just say, well, no, what you're asking me to do is break my commitment that I made to, you know, your softball league or whatever plans you make, and say, from here on out, I need you to respond to me by Wednesday or whatever day you pick to let me know if you're coming. And if you don't, I'm going to assume that you're not. But I would love to see you, but you're a kid and you're not going to call the shots here. And you know what? If your kids want to be included on the fun outings that you do on the weekends, then they can damn well RSVP in a timely fashion. And that's clearly, it's encouraged by mom. There's nothing these bitches love more than the thought of you sitting around lonely and heartbroken on the weekend because your kids shat on you again.
That is exactly what many of them orchestrate, and they're, like I said, unfortunately they're very effective at it, and they have a system that is only too happy to indulge their vengeance.
That's
so
right.
What do you do? Well, let's see. I think we've covered this mostly today. We're about our normal time for closing up shop around here. Is there anything that you wanted to add to this discussion, Dr. T?
Do we have time for one more comment? There's someone named
Yes, sure.
who made a good point. So let me pull that up. Oops, it's reading backwards on my screen.
You can still read it in your, in your sidebar.
That's weird. Oh my God. Okay, this is by Ikbin X. My parents divorced when I was 5, and I've never treated my father any differently. It disgusts me that these kids will actively hate their fathers without considering the situation. My mother was far from flattering about my father, and neither was he about her. I still loved them equally and agreed and disagreed with them whenever they made comments about each other. I'm also disgusted that it's always the child that ends up becoming a weapon. They have to act like a different person depending on what parent they're with at the time. That's exactly right. The children essentially have to live double lives. Even the ones who are kind and respectful towards dad when he's with them, when they're with him at his home, when they're at mom's house, and dad calls, they're like, I can't talk to you right now, because if they sound like they're okay or happy to talk to their dad, mom gets angry. Mom will punish them. This is really just a horrible form of child abuse. There also, and this is what's most galling, is that a lot of the guys I work with, they'll say, look, nobody believes that my kids treat me like this, because they're very well mannered and well behaved when interacting with other adults at school or at church.
Well, yeah, I have said the same thing many times. The system is rigged. It's not fair. But ultimately, with adults, they do make choices in life. They choose the people that they end up in relationships with. But as this comment pointed to real clearly, children don't get that choice. They don't have any say in whether or not that they're put in the crossfire of two warring people. And often, and we may do a program on it sometimes. You have alienation wars where both parents are working overtime to alienate the kid, and it tears them up even further. It sounded like I heard some of that in that comment. Thank you, whoever you were out there, for sharing that.
And I do want to add something to that, though. No, a lot of times the kids don't have a choice. However, when you have a teen or a child who knows how to behave respectfully towards other adults, but feels empowered to crap all over you, then they do have a choice. They do know how to,
is a choice.
They do know how to behave well and respectfully towards others, but they're spewing their bile and their venom at you. And if that is the case, right, because sometimes these kids are just so emotionally messed up, they're having issues all over the place, and they probably don't know any better. But when they demonstrate that they do know better, because they would treat the barista at Starbucks better than they treat you, that's when I think it's really important to have a conversation, which is, look, I love you, I'm your father, and I want to have a loving relationship with you, but I am not going to tolerate this anymore. Which means if you want the perks that come with having a loving, involved father, then you need to start treating me differently. And dads, if your kids are doing this to you and expect you to say pay for college, fuck them. Don't do it. You're rewarding bad behavior. They want you to pay for, summer camp, missions that they're going on, a new iPhone, and they're disrespecting you and abusing you? Absolutely not. And tell them why you're saying no. That you're not going to reward their bad behavior, and you would be happy to cover the cost of these things, but giving them those special privileges, spending that kind of money on them when they are actively thumbing their nose at you and rejecting you is just stupid.
And you might ask yourself, when you find yourself struggling to issue that no, ask yourself how much enabling bad behavior in your former wife did for you. Ask you how much good that did in the long run in your failed marriage. And you're going to get the same answer from your child. I want to put up one more comment. As we're being visited by Steve Brule of Studio Brule, and want to read what he has to say here. Said, a friend I met in his 30s, father's left when he was 2. He was raised by his mother and was devoted to her. I asked if he wanted to meet his father, and he said unquestionably no. He hated the father he had never met. I later met his mother, and that was a weird experience. After one day at her house, I understood 100% why my friend's father left. I could not wait to get away from that house after one day. It's hard to explain, but his mother was extremely manipulative in very subtle ways. It was horribly oppressive there, and yet my friend could not see it, and he hated the father he would never want to meet. He will never see the other side of the story. Whew.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
I don't know what I'm going to add to that. This is what happens. Thanks for that, Steve.
Yeah.
Okay, we are getting close to out of time. So, Dr. T, is there any final thoughts, any final touches you want to put on this before we sign off for another week?
Yep. You know, if your kid comes back to you when you say, no, I'm not going to give you college tuition, if you're fortunate if you don't live in New Jersey, because you could be court ordered to do it there, tell them why and say, well, see, this just shows you don't love me. Say, no, I'm showing that I love you by putting a limit on this, because if you treat other people like this and expect that they're going to bend over backwards and be kind to you when you are not offering the same, it doesn't work like that in this world. And you know, and will your ex-wife or ex-girlfriend spin that around and say, see, I was right about him? Yes, of course she will. But in reality, she's the one who did that to her kid, because she taught the kid that you can crap all over your dad and expect him to be a doormat for you. So don't feel guilty about not paying your kid's college tuition or buying a pony or whatever the heck the kid wants, because you're not going to reward bad behavior. It's the mother who has done that to the child by encouraging this behavior and giving the kid the belief that he or she can treat you like this and continue to reap the privileges of having a loving, kind father. It doesn't work that way. It shouldn't work that way. So that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you. You know, I don't know why or even totally how we ended up with a family court system that is, instead of, you know, because everybody knows that divorce, if you can marry, you can divorce. That's the law of the land. Divorces are going to happen. And how we ended up with a family court system that instead of helping families break in a more orderly and functional way and emerge on the other side as a restructured family unit, and instead set about their destruction for the profit of lawyers, with children in the crosshairs of all of it, destroying their lives, making it easy and profitable for people to exploit unwarranted power in harming one of the parents. You know, we could have 100 shows on how and why that happened. But that is, you know, if you don't believe it, go rent the movie Divorce Corp and learn something about our family law system. That is the system we have. That is how divorces happen in many countries. It is a fiasco that results in a child without a parent, and often when you have an alienating parent, the child ends up absent the parent that would bring them any sense of real stability and health, and they end up with an abusive, crazy parent. If you want to avoid that with 100% certainty, don't get married. I mean, again, I'll say it again, don't get married in this system. It's a corrupt, wrong system. If you're already there, if you're already in the divorce process, then I would only suggest that you listen to exactly what Dr. T was just saying there, is that you don't do your kids any favor by being their doormat. Children need parents. They do. And parenting implies authority. And if you're a doormat instead of a parent, then you're robbing your children of something that they need. It's not just the alienating parent that's the problem. It's your tolerance of that kind of behavior that is also a problem for them, because what you're giving them, their last hope of somebody saying no to this, is what you're robbing from them by giving in and by being their doormat. So don't do it. That's all I'm saying. You've got to take care of yourself, and the best way you can raise children, at least in my opinion, is to role model being somebody that takes care of themselves in these situations. With that, I want to thank everybody. Thanks, Steve, for dropping in again. Thank you, Dr. T. Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you think you are or might be in a relationship that is abusive or is harming you, please visit shrinkformen.com and take a look at Dr. T's services over there. Also, if you're interested on the other side of this, of beginning to speak out about some of the injustices in our legal system that are helping to contribute to some of these problems, please stop by avoiceformen.com and check us out there. In the meantime, everybody, thanks for showing up, and we'll see you next week.